At exactly 6:03 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled into my gravel driveway like they were rolling up to a raid. Not even enough time for me to get to my coffee pot. The dogs barked like we were being invaded. And they weren't wrong. I opened the door in my flannel robe expecting maybe a package, maybe the neighbor's lost dog again, but instead I got Karen Wexler, the HOA president, standing there like a storm cloud with 2 bulky security guys in sunglasses and a man in a suit holding a clipboard. "We're here to notify you that your property has been seized under Article 9C of the HOA Emergency Land Reallocation," she said, sounding like she rehearsed it in the mirror all night. I stared at her, blinking. "You what now?" I asked, thinking maybe this was some kind of prank or fever dream. But no, the man in the suit handed me a folder stamped with a big red "Urgent," and inside it said, in convoluted legal nonsense, that my home was now considered part of a public beautification project. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because if I didn't, I was going to slam the door so hard it'd snap in half. I built this place with my own hands 15 years ago. I fought for this land, literally. And now a woman who once fined me for having an off-brand mailbox was trying to take it like she was some warlord with a clipboard. Karen didn't even blink as she announced they'd be back in 48 hours with demolition crews. "You can remove any sentimental items before then," she added, as if she were doing me a favor. The guards stepped forward to emphasize her point, one of them cracking his knuckles like I was supposed to be scared. I shut the door, locked it, and walked straight down to my basement. That's where the real story begins. I didn't just own land. I owned legacy. And they had no idea who they were messing with. In a locked steel cabinet beneath my old workbench was a case wrapped in aged leather. Inside, among a few personal artifacts from my time overseas, was something I never thought I'd need again. Declassified documents, map, federal seals, a few things even I wasn't sure I was still allowed to have. The kind of thing you keep only if you know you might need to end a war. And right now, war had just been declared. My name is Dean, and I'm a retired military strategist, former member of a government task force tasked with protecting infrastructure during national emergencies. Most of what I did was buried under NDAs and black ink. But I kept my brain sharp and my paperwork sharper. I never thought I'd be using any of it against an HOA. But that's how far Karen and her board had pushed it. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and document scans. I started by confirming what I already knew. My land was never under HOA jurisdiction. I'd opted out when I first bought it because the association hadn't been fully formed yet. There was even a notarized waiver filed at the county. But now, buried in the newest filings, someone had faked a vote that claimed my property had been absorbed unanimously into the HOA last year. I never received a single notice. Not one. At the county recorder's office, I got a sick feeling in my stomach when the clerk showed me a series of scanned resolutions bearing my forged signature. Even the notary's name was fake. I asked for copies and headed straight for my truck. I knew who to call next. Judge Martha Briggs wasn't just any retired judge. She was the one who trained me during my time with Homeland's Infrastructure Defense Division. A bulldog in a cardigan. She picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you're not calling about that HOA you mentioned last year," she groaned. "They've gone too far," I said. "They just filed a hostile seizure using forged documents. They're bringing in demolition teams in 2 days." Silence. Then she said, "Get here. Bring everything." I drove 4 hours north to her cabin in the hills, a place so remote that GPS stops working 2 turns before you get there. She had coffee waiting, a legal pad already full of scribbles. "They're using a 9C clause, huh?" she asked, flipping through the papers. "That's usually tied to emergency city planning, natural disasters, sinkholes, condemned properties. Not rural homes with hand-built decks and solar panels." I nodded. "They claimed it's part of a community beautification project. They want to build a fountain and green space, right where my kitchen is." She scoffed. "A fountain for who?" Deer and raccoons. I handed her the scanned copies. She looked over the signatures, then stopped cold. They used Richard Lanning as the notary? She asked. He's been dead for 3 years. I grinned. Exactly. We started building what I called a paper fortress. Not just a legal defense, but a layered, indisputable set of proofs that would expose the HOA's corruption. Old land surveys, county property lines, the original deed, photos of my build stages, even satellite imagery from Google Earth showing my home's existence long before their so-called boundary vote. But I wasn't just on defense. I wanted them to regret ever coming near my fence line. That night I dug through my archive and found something I'd forgotten about. Operation Smokestack. A federal emergency contingency program I'd participated in after a series of natural disasters crippled public infrastructure. My land had been one of a dozen pre-cleared command post sites, designated fallback centers for continuity of government in case of disaster. Though the program was sunset years ago, the documents still held power, especially the exemption clause. No jurisdiction override without federal review. No HOA could touch it. The next morning I emailed a digital copy of that clause to Karen with a simple note. You're going to need more than a clipboard. By noon, my mailbox had been knocked down, the motion lights shattered, and a stack of violation tickets stuck to my truck's windshield. They were escalating. That's when I installed the new cameras. Night vision, thermal cloud back. If they wanted a fight, I was going to give them one. Not just in court, but in public. Because here's the thing about people like Karen. They thrive in the shadows, in silence, in unchecked power. The moment you shine a light, they shrivel. And I had a spotlight ready to go. It was only day one, and I could already feel the war drums beating. But I wasn't worried. They had lawyers. I had a weapon no lawyer could match. And soon, the world would see it. Day 3 began like any other, except this time there were reporters at the end of my driveway. Not many, just one guy with a handheld camera and another scribbling in a notepad. They looked a little out of place next to the private property sign and the small army of lawn sprinklers I'd rigged to go off in case any trespassers showed up. I didn't talk to them, but I saw the news segment later that night. Local HOA accused of attempted land seizure through forged votes was the headline. The real kicker was the B-roll footage of Karen storming across the street at a previous meeting, screaming at a neighbor for having wind chimes. The comments under the video were brutal. The internet had found its villain. Meanwhile, Martha and I kept laying track on the legal front. Our motions were moving through the system, and we had a hearing scheduled for the following week, but we both knew Karen wouldn't wait that long. She had started playing dirty, and once people like her taste blood, they rarely stop. What we didn't expect was her next move to be so public. That afternoon, I got a call from my neighbor Mike again, sounding winded and panicked. Dean, you need to come down to the community center. Now. It's bad. I threw on my jacket and drove over, half expecting to see my property listed as part of a new neighborhood brochure or something. What I saw instead nearly made me crash the truck. Inside the community center was a full-blown HOA gala in progress, balloons, banners, catered food, even a podium. But the most stunning part was a large poster board on an easel near the stage with the words, "Future Site of Willow Estates, Parkland Commons." Below that, a giant photo of my house, circled in red, with a dotted line through it labeled Phase 1, Demolition. I pushed through the crowd, my blood boiling, and got close enough to hear Karen on the mic telling attendees that generous donors had made it possible for the community to reclaim neglected land and turn it into a sanctuary. She even name-dropped some fake committee called Citizens for Open Green Initiatives as a partner in the effort. I didn't confront her there. I didn't need to. I walked right back out, drove home, and opened a folder marked Plan C. Inside it were my notes from months ago, back when I first suspected something fishy was going on with the HOA's land grab. I'd started compiling a network map, who was connected to whom, where the money flowed, and which names popped up on multiple deeds across the neighborhood. It wasn't just Karen. It was bigger than her. The board was working with a real estate developer named Clint Raines, a guy who'd been quietly buying up parcels through shell companies and lobbying for rezoning laws under the table. I had emails, transaction logs, and even a voicemail Karen left someone by mistake, in which she said, "Once Dean's place is flattened, the rest will fall like dominoes." I leaked everything. I created a burner email and sent the full package to 3 local reporters, 2 state watchdog groups, and 1 Reddit thread that specialized in HOA horror stories. Within hours, it was viral. Comments poured in. People were tagging their friends, writing things like, "This is the HOA from hell," and "They messed with the wrong guy." I didn't post the video from the gala just yet. I was saving that for court. But I did post a still shot of the demolition board with my home circled in red. It caught fire instantly. And then came the messages. Neighbors started reaching out. Some I barely knew, others I thought had sided with the HOA. Turns out, most of them were just scared. They'd been bullied, fined, and threatened into silence. But now, with the spotlight burning a hole through Karen's carefully maintained image, they were ready to talk. One woman, Julie, told me that she was fined $1,200 because her backyard hammock had non-conforming colors. A retired vet named Tom said they tried to evict him over a supposedly unapproved shed that had been on his property for 20 years. The most damning story came from a single mother named Leslie, who claimed the HOA board trespassed onto her land and removed her fence while she was at work. The justification? Fence style incompatible with the neighborhood aesthetic. I compiled all of it and sent it to Martha. Her reply was simple. They just turned this into a class action lawsuit. We filed a motion to consolidate claims, and the judge fast-tracked our request. Suddenly, it wasn't just me fighting them. It was over a dozen homeowners, all with documented abuses, coordinated under one legal umbrella. Karen's board went into full panic mode. Their lawyer, Brenner, tried to issue a blanket gag order, but the judge shut it down immediately. "Freedom of speech does not get suspended when you feel uncomfortable," she said in court. It was a beautiful moment. The night before our next court hearing, someone tried to intimidate me. I woke up to the sound of tires crunching gravel. I peeked out and saw a black SUV parked just beyond the camera's view. Whoever was in it never got out, never approached, just sat there for nearly an hour, engine running. Then they peeled off. I added an extra layer of surveillance after that. I even wired a motion sensor to trigger a spotlight and an alarm tone that sounded like a freight train. "You want to scare me? Try harder." Then came the drone. Mid-afternoon the next day, while I was outside adjusting the perimeter cameras, I heard the faint hum of rotors. A quadcopter hovered just above the treeline, aimed directly at my house. I waved. It didn't leave. I pulled out my handheld radio jammer, flicked the switch, and the drone tumbled out of the sky like a drunk bird. It landed in a bush with a satisfying crunch. I took the memory card out before delivering it to the local sheriff. Footage included 5 minutes of my yard and one blurry shot of Karen standing on the other end with a tablet in her hands. Things were escalating fast. The HOA was unraveling, and Karen was getting reckless. But that only made my case stronger. Each new stunt was another nail in the coffin. Still, I stayed calm, focused, calculated. That night I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blueprint of my land and the list of legal charges we were bringing against the HOA. Fraud, forgery, trespassing, harassment, property destruction, malicious prosecution. It was no longer just about stopping them. It was about exposing every dark corner of their operation, dragging their smug sense of immunity into the light, and burning it down with facts and footage. They wanted to destroy my home for a park no one asked for, funded by a scheme no one consented to, controlled by people no one trusted. They thought they could get away with it because they always had. But they underestimated the one thing they couldn't file a motion against: truth. And I had more of it than they could bury in 100 fake resolutions. They came at me with lies. I was coming at them with everything else. Courtroom benches are a special kind of uncomfortable, the kind that make you feel like you've done something wrong just by sitting in them. But I sat tall that morning, arms crossed, eyes forward, waiting for Karen and her circus to arrive. Martha sat beside me, calm and composed as always, flipping through our neatly organized folders that made our table look like a command center. On the other side of the room, Brenner walked in with his usual smugness, like he still believed he was the smartest man in the room despite being outmaneuvered at every turn. Karen followed behind him, wearing a stiff blazer and a forced smile that cracked the moment she saw me. I gave her a little nod, just enough to let her know I was exactly where I wanted to be. The judge entered, stern, focused, and no nonsense. Judge Celeste Durant. She had the sharp tone of someone who dealt with too many inflated egos and was done pretending to be impressed. She opened the session by listing the allegations against the HOA. Unlawful property seizure attempts, falsification of legal documents, harassment, and abuse of power. As she read, Karen squirmed. Brenner tried to look bored. The courtroom was quiet except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the clicking of a stenographer's keys. Then our side opened with a bang. Martha began with the forged notary stamp, presenting a notarized statement from the real notary's estate confirming his death years before the document was allegedly signed. Then came the fake vote, exposed by matching signatures lifted from prior community surveys, clearly cut and pasted. And finally, the piece de resistance, video of Karen bragging at the HOA gala about bulldozing the veterans' shack and putting up a park. You could feel the energy shift. Karen tried to interrupt, claiming the video was taken out of context, but Judge Durant wasn't having it. The only context I need is that you referred to someone's home as a shack and discussed demolishing it without due process, she said flatly. Martha followed up with the federal designation paperwork for Operation Smokestack, outlining the legal exemption that prohibited any local authority, including HOA, from modifying the land without federal review. Brenner objected, claiming the program was obsolete, but Martha countered with a letter from a Department of Homeland Security official confirming the designation had never been revoked. It wasn't just a legal battle now. It was a siege, and our side was fully armed. Karen's team tried to regain ground by arguing that my land had been neglected and unmaintained, but I had recent drone footage, maintenance logs, and neighbor testimonials that shut that down quickly. Then came the surprise twist that even Martha didn't see coming. The judge ordered both sides to submit digital records for review. That included HOA communications. Within a few hours, the court clerk brought in a printed email chain recovered from the HOA's internal system. It contained messages between Karen, Brenner, and the real estate developer, Clint Raines. In one message, Karen explicitly wrote, "If we push Dean out before the end of the quarter, Clint promised us a developer's fee." Brenner went pale. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. The courtroom buzzed with hushed voices, and Judge Durant raised a hand to silence everyone. "This changes the nature of the case. What we're looking at may cross into criminal conspiracy," she said. That one sentence hit like a wrecking ball. But just when I thought we'd seen it all, Karen panicked and made the worst decision of her life. That evening, while the court was adjourned for the day, she showed up to my property. Not discreetly. Not alone. She arrived in a pickup with 4 hired workers and a small bulldozer, claiming she was enforcing the HOA's right to begin Phase 1. The workers looked uneasy. One of them was recording the whole thing on his phone. I stood calmly on my porch, phone in hand, already on the line with the sheriff's office. Karen screamed about me, delaying progress, and squatting on HOA land. I calmly told her she was violating a federal injunction. That only made her louder. Then, the bulldozer started to roll. But instead of tearing up my lawn, it drove right over one of the decoy markers I'd set up, a fake utility flag I had labeled gas line, high pressure. The operator slammed the brakes, cursed loudly, and jumped out. Karen turned white. The crew refused to continue and drove off within minutes. I got the whole thing on camera, of course. Every scream, every step, every flinch. I sent the footage directly to the court and the local news. By the next morning, Karen's face was all over the internet again, this time trying to intimidate me into giving up my land while standing next to a backhoe. The court reconvened the following day, and Judge Durant was livid. She held the HOA in contempt for violating the injunction and issued a personal restraining order against Karen. Brenner tried to resign mid-session, claiming he had no knowledge of Karen's unsanctioned actions. The judge allowed it, but not before recommending the case be forwarded to the district attorney for further review. Karen's replacement attorney barely said a word. They knew it was over. But the final blow hadn't even landed yet. Martha took the floor one last time, presenting the class action petition signed by over 30 homeowners in the neighborhood. Each documented a separate case of HOA abuse, illegal fines, forced evictions, property damage, and intimidation. Together, it painted a picture of an HOA board that had morphed into a private dictatorship. Judge Durant stared at the papers for a long moment, then looked up and said, "It's not just this man's property they tried to steal. It's his dignity, his safety, and the very foundation of legal ownership. This HOA has not only acted outside its jurisdiction, it has weaponized it." Then, she issued a formal injunction freezing all HOA operations pending federal investigation, ordered a full audit of their finances, and referred the matter to state and federal oversight board. Karen was escorted out of the courtroom. Not in handcuffs, not yet, but the expression on her face said she knew it was coming. Outside the courthouse, I didn't say a word. Neighbors patted me on the back, reporters asked for comments, and even some former HOA board members offered apologies. I just nodded. The war wasn't over yet, but the battlefield had shifted. For the first time in months, the pressure lifted, if only slightly. Back home that night, I stood on the porch and watched the sun drop behind the hills. The cameras were still rolling, the lights still on, the alarms still active. But for the first time in weeks, I slept without checking the feed. Because I knew now that Karen had thrown everything she had at me, and I was still standing. And she, for all her fake authority, was collapsing under the weight of her own arrogance. They started this war thinking I was just another homeowner. They forgot I was trained for siege warfare. They forgot I knew how to win battles without ever firing a shot. And most of all, they forgot one crucial truth. A man who knows the law better than his enemies doesn't need to raise his voice. He just has to wait. Karen must have expected me to roll over. Maybe she thought a few threats and a mountain of fake paperwork would scare me off my own land. But what she didn't count on was that I don't scare easy, and I don't lose battles, especially not ones fought on ground I built with my own two hands. By the time the sun rose on the second day, I was already neck-deep in legal filings, working shoulder to shoulder with Judge Martha Briggs in her wood-paneled cabin that looked like it had been plucked from a Norman Rockwell painting and dropped in the middle of nowhere. The place didn't have cell service, but it had the best broadband I'd seen in a while, and that was all we needed to build what Martha dubbed the paper fortress. We weren't just defending my land. We were laying legal tripwires, jurisdictional mines, and historical blockades so tangled and tight the HOA's legal team wouldn't know which foot to shoot next. Martha had a whiteboard taller than she was, and it was already covered in flowcharts, bullet points, land plot overlays, and one sticky note that read Karen equals fraud queen in bright red. We started by filing a cease and desist letter with the county on the grounds of property seizure without due process. Then we hit them with a request for a temporary restraining order based on forged signatures, citing the death of the notary listed. I even included a copy of the obituary, something about him winning third place in a county chili cook-off and dying peacefully in his sleep 3 years ago. That alone should have blown up their timeline, but we didn't stop there. Martha drafted a land patent exemption motion invoking federal emergency status under the now-defunct Operation Smokestack, and even though the program was dormant, The clause stating that the land had been earmarked as a backup command post was enough to complicate their claim significantly. Next, we dug into the HOA's own charter. It was sloppily written and riddled with inconsistencies, especially in how properties could be absorbed into their jurisdiction. According to their own bylaws, any expansion of their boundaries required a 90% majority of the current residents and an open town hall vote with recorded minutes. Not only had they skipped the vote, but they'd fabricated the resident list. I recognized 3 names on that forged approval list. 2 were from houses that had been vacant for years, and 1 was the name of a local dog that had gone viral on Instagram for skateboarding. We printed everything and added it to what Martha called the arsenal. Meanwhile, back at my ranch, the HOA wasn't sitting idle. My neighbor Mike called me that afternoon. He said 3 people wearing HOA vests had walked through my yard measuring things with a laser level and spray painting little red X's near my deck. I checked my new cameras. He wasn't kidding. They marked a path from my driveway to the edge of my property like they were planning an excavation. That night, I pulled out a folding chair, sat under the stars, and watched the footage again with a pen in hand. I sketched out a defensive layout, not for a battlefield, but for my property. If they wanted to play rough, I'd be ready. I installed motion-activated floodlights and buried fake utility cables under the lawn just deep enough to look real. If they tried digging, they'd hit a maze of pipes and markers that'd make any work crew panic and call in the city inspector. Then came the next attack. Around 3 in the morning, someone tampered with my well. I only caught it because the pressure sensor in the tank triggered an alert to my phone. I checked the feed and saw 2 silhouettes wearing hoodies and gloves, using what looked like bolt cutters and a crowbar to access the casing. They didn't see the camera hidden in the birdhouse. I filed a police report immediately and sent a copy of the footage to a local news tip line. They didn't air it yet, but I had it in the chamber if needed. Meanwhile, Martha was working her own magic. She filed an emergency motion to force the HOA to produce their meeting minutes, voting records, and communications with their lawyer. And when they resisted, she hit them with a discovery request and a notice of spoliation, essentially warning them that destroying or altering any documents would result in sanctions. That was when things got interesting. Their lawyer, a smug corporate guy named Aaron Brenner, sent me a cease and desist letter for harassment, claiming I was intimidating board members by showing up to HOA events and recording them. I hadn't stepped within 50 feet of an HOA meeting, but I had been sending clips to the county board of my property being vandalized. So I sent Brenner a copy of the footage where Karen stood in my yard with a crowbar yelling, "I don't care if he built this himself, we're flattening it." Karen was clearly losing her grip, and Brenner knew it. But what he didn't know was that the footage I had wasn't just a few shaky cell phone clips. I had high-res drone footage, thermal night vision from the ridge behind my house, and audio recordings from when they thought they were out of earshot. The crown jewel? A video from the HOA's own spring gala, held at a fancy golf resort, where I'd posed as a wine server and captured 3 board members laughing about how they'd finally get that prime land for pennies. One of them joked about installing a tennis court over my septic field. The video was gold, and it hadn't even been used yet. I was saving that for the perfect moment. A few residents from the neighborhood started reaching out, too. An elderly couple told me Karen had fined them $500 for having a lawn ornament she didn't like. A single mom got written up because her trash bins were visible from the street on collection day. The pattern was clear. This wasn't about rules or regulations. It was about control. And Karen wanted mine more than anyone's. By the end of day 2, we had filed 3 motions, blocked 2 false claims, caught their team on camera twice, and had a witness list building by the hour. Martha looked at the timeline and said, "They'll either collapse from legal pressure or escalate into full-blown idiocy." She was right. Because the next day, they'd make their most dangerous move yet. One they wouldn't recover from. I sat on my porch late that evening, sipping coffee and watching the security feeds roll. I wasn't just protecting my land anymore. I was protecting every person who'd been steamrolled by power-drunk HOAs who thought their little rulebooks made them untouchable. They picked the wrong house. They picked the wrong man. And they had no idea what kind of storm was coming their way. The calm that came after the court ruling was deceptive, like the eerie quiet after a storm that promises more trouble in the distance. I wasn't naive enough to think the fight was over. The HOA was bruised, humiliated, and under investigation, but Karen was the kind of person who didn't know when to quit. I kept everything in place. My surveillance system, legal team, community network, and a few cards I hadn't even played yet. One of them sat locked in the same steel case where this entire mess began, tucked between the Operation Smokestack documents and an old military-issued thumb drive. That thumb drive contained something so few people even remembered existed that it felt more like folklore than fact. But to the right authorities, it was everything. Years ago, when I was serving with the Infrastructure Defense Division, we ran scenario drills for regional collapses, natural disasters, cyber attacks, even civil unrest. Operation Smokestack wasn't just a plan to protect infrastructure. It was designed to preserve critical fallback locations in rural areas, ensuring continuity of government operations if urban centers were compromised. My property had been designated one of those fallback zones because of its elevation, proximity to supply routes, and reinforced structure. When the program ended, most of the designations were deactivated. But a few, like mine, remained on a dormant contingency list, accessible only through a federal database requiring both clearance and authentication. I still had both. So when Karen, ever the fool, decided to file a secondary claim against my property on behalf of a new entity she created called the Willow Commons Community Restoration Initiative, I knew it was time. The claim was filed under a different name and with a new set of fake signatures, pretending the organization was separate from the HOA. But it used the same letterhead, the same language, and the same target: my land. She filed it through a different branch of the county office, hoping to skirt around the ruling. What she didn't know was that every time someone attempted to take legal action against my property, it triggered an alert in a national infrastructure database flagged for active monitoring. Within hours of the filing, I received a call from a restricted number. The voice on the other end was calm, firm, and immediately familiar. "Mr. Dean, this is Agent Rowe with Federal Infrastructure Protection. You were listed as point of contact for Site Echo 6. We've detected a pattern of unauthorized jurisdictional actions against the location." I confirmed it and forwarded every file, video, motion, and evidence I had collected. I didn't need to ask what would happen next. They knew how to handle it. The next morning, 3 unmarked SUVs pulled into the HOA headquarters parking lot. Men and women in plain tactical gear stepped out and quietly walked into the building. No sirens, no flashing lights, just quiet authority backed by federal muscle. Karen, already back in her office as if nothing had happened, was escorted out 15 minutes later holding a folder and yelling something about constitutional rights. But she wasn't arrested, not yet. They were just getting started. Back on my land, I received a visit from a federal agent who delivered a packet in a sealed folder. Inside was a formal reinstatement notice for Operation Smokestack's emergency fallback designation, triggered by ongoing jurisdictional interference. The effect was immediate and absolute. From that moment on, my property became off-limits to any non-federal entity. That meant the HOA, the county, the state. None of them could legally step foot past my gate without written federal permission. I installed the new sign that evening. It wasn't fancy, just a metal plate mounted on a post, but it said everything that needed saying: no trespassing. Federal Designation Zone. Entry restricted by Order 22, FIP 491. The news broke 2 days later. Karen was named in a civil conspiracy investigation alongside 3 other board members and the real estate developer Clint Raines. The state attorney general's office confirmed that evidence had been turned over by federal investigators linking their actions to a coordinated effort to seize land and flip it under the guise of community development. The emails, the fake filings, the hush payments, it was all there. And while the feds moved methodically, the public moved fast. Local residents who once stayed quiet were now emboldened. Protest signs popped up overnight in front yards. Karen Free Zone became a trending phrase. The HOA tried to hold a board meeting to calm things down, but no one showed up. They lost quorum, and with it, their ability to act. Martha and I watched it all from my porch, sipping black coffee while reporters hounded the remnants of the HOA for statements. They really thought they could outpaper you, she said, shaking her head. They brought a pen to a tactical briefing, I replied. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't spike the ball. I just maintained what I'd built. My land, my peace, my dignity. But I did throw a barbecue. It wasn't fancy, just a grill, some chairs, and a lot of laughter. Neighbors showed up, even ones I hadn't spoken to in years. They brought food, drinks, and stories. One guy admitted he used to be scared of me. Thought you were some kind of survivalist lunatic, he said, handing me a beer. Now I know you're just the guy we all needed and didn't realize it. I took the beer and smiled. I'm just a guy who got tired of bullies. Karen? Last I heard she was trying to sue her own legal team for misrepresentation. Good luck with that. Her reputation was toast, her connections worthless, and her power dissolved. The HOA board dissolved soon after, unable to fill seats or raise funds. Several members moved away quietly, like rats leaving a ship. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. The system finally worked the way it was supposed to, once someone had the courage to push it hard enough. That night, I walked my property under the stars, flashlight in hand, boots crunching the gravel path I'd laid years ago. Every fence post was still standing. Every sensor still glowing. Every inch still mine. I passed the new metal sign and smiled. Not because it kept others out, but because it reminded me of what I fought for. Not just land, but principle. The right to stand your ground when you're in the right. The right to push back when those in power think they're above the law. They tried to erase me with paper and ink. I answered with something stronger. Something no lawyer could match. Truth, strategy, and an unshakable will. And in the end, when the headlines faded and the courtrooms emptied, the land was still here. My home was still standing. And I was still watching, waiting, ready, just in case anyone ever forgot what happened when they tried to take it by force.